because I never have anything to talk about with my attorneys, usually, otherwise than the case at hand, which sometimes gets boring.
I just had announcer Tim Tyler on the Superpodcast talking about the years that he did the commentary for ICW, and he said this was the entire run of ICW where they were in that studio in Lexington. The way he was paid was he was called outside, and Angelo Poffo had a Mercedes, and in the trunk was just cash everywhere.
Yeah.
And he would pay people out of that, and Tim Tyler said, "Aren't you worried about driving around town with a Mercedes filled with cash?" And Angelo said, "No, they know whose car this is." And that was it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I got an email here, and I was going to read this on another show because you run this thing. But since I'm doing everything else around here today, somebody emailed me the story about Austin Idol cashing the check. The $5,000 Battle Royal check in Columbus, Georgia has been well documented. We're not going to tell that story again, but this question was from a different viewpoint of it. Because Idol had told, once he got it cashed at the bank, he came out and handed his wife, the envelope and said, "Here, I can't remember what his happy anniversary or whatever. I can't remember what his statement was, but he handed it to his wife." And this guy wrote me an email, said, "What in the world in the late 70s, 50 pictures of whoever the fuck, what in the world did she fall out of the car? Has history recorded what she said?" And I wrote back and said, no, actually, for a main event wrestler in the 70s and 80s especially, to have $5,000 or $10,000 in cash laying around the house in some stupid method or another was not at all unusual enough to be remarked on for a lot of guys or wives.
Plus, you probably wouldn't have fallen out because he was a little bit of a loner, and in a lot of places, when he was in New York, when he was in Alabama at times, his wife actually rode with him.
Yeah, but I mean, it also, it was a lot of money to get over for winning a phony battle royal, but it was not a ton of money for main event guys to have carrying around in that era. Gorilla Monsoon, every time you saw Gorilla Monsoon in public somewhere at a TV taping or at Costco, whatever it was, he would have between $5,000 and $10,000 in cash on his person. And if you said, "Gorilla, what's that for?" He said, "I might want to buy something." And it's just, that's just what they did.
Well, professional wrestling was one of the great cash businesses for so many years.
One of the great cash cows for so many years. And we actually, next week, boy howdy. What is next week? I'm trying to do the math in my head on our various schedule, but the experience that comes out on what I believe will be October 18th is going to be a real rip snorter.
Oh, yeah.
With a special guest that we'll talk about this Tuesday on the experience, but also I have uncovered some evidence of a spot show that I remembered, but it's before I got in the business, so I didn't actually, when I was a photographer, I liked the big crowds, but I didn't minutely break down the average ticket price and the exact number of attendance and gate and et cetera, like I do now obsessively after being in the business, right? So at the time I remember this, but I found the documentation on some old paperwork we found. Christine Jarrett ran a spot show in Huntingburg, Indiana in May, I think it was, of 1981. I'll have this in front of me at a later date. And that is when Evansville, Indiana ran every Wednesday night 52 weeks a year. And Louisville ran 52 weeks a year on Tuesday night. And those towns were only 125 miles apart, right? Down Interstate 64, east to west. And Huntingburg, Indiana was on Interstate 64, not really right in the middle, but about 40 or 50 miles from Evansville and probably about 70 or 80 from Louisville. And she ran that one night on a Thursday night after Louisville would run on Tuesday and Evansville would run on Wednesday. And it was one of those deals where they just hit they had a great gymnasium, a beautiful high school gym because high school basketball is so hot in Indiana, and they have some wonderful gyms. And this is the town. I don't know that Huntingburg, Indiana, somebody can look it up, in 1981 had 10,000 people in it, right? But from the surrounding area, because it was the county high school. So they had about a 3,000 seat gym, and they hit the local sports team or school group sponsor that was just perfect and did everything right. And they drew over 2,500 people for this Thursday night spot show. And the reason I knew that I was able to figure it out because I remember Miss Jarrett telling us that the gate was $12,000 that night. and now that I know, okay, exactly how many ringside tickets there's 400 in a standard ringside setup. And then I remember they had the huge bleachers and everything. You can figure the average ticket price. And then the kids' ticket was $4, whatever. So with an already established show on every Tuesday night in Louisville and every Wednesday night in Evansville, there was still enough interest coming for the stars coming to this small town that they drew 2,600 people in a town that couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 times that size. And yes, they came from surrounding area, but it was an insane atmosphere to have a spot show in. And then you look and you see, okay, that means that week they drew in a 130-mile stretch of interstate for 3 shows over 7,000 people. It was amazing. How did I get started on that topic, by the way?
The Austin Idol check.
Oh, so anyway, yes, so they drew $12,000. So after the sponsor got his share, I would imagine it probably was Bill Dundee. I don't think Miss Christine would never carry that much money around, but probably Bill Dundee took that money back to the office that night, and he had $8,000 plus. That she had picture table money. I think we did a couple grand at the picture table that night with pictures at $1 and programs at 50 cents. But yeah, one of the boys had, and that would happen in even bigger shows, depending on the territories, where one of the guys that was really trusted by the office, Arnold Skolin, whatever, would have $10,000 or $15,000 or sometimes $20,000. I don't know. Jack Curtis may have had $30,000 one night in Bogalusa, Louisiana. We did like $35,000 at the fucking high school football field. So it was interesting. Hey, when I couldn't get to sing, and I was a throwback to the old days in 2012 when I wanted to have Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin pay a $10,000 fine with cash, and be heels about it, right? I told Sinclair, Joe Koff, I said, King Sinclair, obviously in Baltimore, can get $10,000 in cash, right? And for what it was a corporate thing, for whatever fucking reason or another. They said, couldn't we just have a check? I said, no. So I got $10,000 in cash in my money and stowed it in a secret location in my vehicle and drove it to Baltimore and had Charlie Haas stick it down the front of his tights where I knew nobody would get it until he was finished with it.
And then Jackie Gator was seen walking around town with cash.
With a fur coat on. No. I checked. Jackie wasn't in town. And another time, we did the deal where we got $25,000 in cash on Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV oh shit, now I've even forgotten my own angle. Either the Fantastics had to put up to get the title match with the Heavenly Bodies or vice versa. We put it up to get them. I think it may have been we put it up to get them and then used the ether on them, whatever the fuck. At any rate, we got at the time the manager, or the managers, it was the Milburn Drysdale of that bank in Morristown that we were doing our business with, was friends with Horner named Buzz Lacey. Buzz was the manager or president or whoever the fuck of our bank there in Morristown. And to make it look really good, we had him come to the TV taping and open up the suitcase and show the $25,000 in cash, right? Well, this was an early Smoky Mountain Wrestling program, and the boys, none of the boys at that point especially knew who the fiancé was, Rick Rubin, that was paying for this. So when they saw Buzz walk in a suit with a briefcase with $25,000 in it, they didn't know he was the manager of the Commerce Bank of Beverly Hills in Morristown. They thought he was the fucking money guy, right? So they were all going up to him all night. All the boys, oh, hello, sir. How are you, sir? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And he didn't have shit to do with anything. But then when Rick Rubin really came to a show, they thought that he was fucking Cat Collins's bummy friend from the radio business. Nobody knew who he was. And I mean, at the time, Rubin looked like a fucking hippie, right? He's with Cat Collins. They knew Cat.
He looks more like a Cat Collins than Cat Collins does.
Yeah, he looks like he should be named Cat Collins, and Cat Collins should be named Rick Rubin. But yeah, so they all the boys thought fucking Rubin was some bum and was hanging around with Cat.
Hey, you brought up merch for the Memphis territory earlier. From what you remember, either during your time as a fan or when you became a photographer and you would have knowledge of things from when you were a fan, what was the single biggest night of merch they ever had?
I know exactly when it was. It was the week after Thanksgiving, 1976, for the time they booked the first match between Jerry Lawler and Coyote Calhoun, the wacky radio DJ here in town. And that was the night, because remember I said the OVW's Christmas Chaos show in December of 2000 got iced out because of an ice storm, and the talent couldn't get there, and we had to postpone it until 6 weeks later. So it was the show so nice we had to promote it twice. Right. And we sold out. We had already pretty much sold out in advance the first night, so we sold out the Louisville Gardens twice for the same show, right? Because everybody kept their tickets and we sold more. The same thing happened 25 years previously. It was this long anticipated match between Jerry Lawler and Coyote Calhoun, the wacky radio DJ. Wacky was the top 40 station in town, and everybody listened to Coyote back then. 790. No, it wasn't 7. That's Wave. It was goddamn Wacky was, what the fuck was it? No, Wave was 970. Wacky was 790. Anyway, on your AM dial, at 6 to 10, everybody listened to Coyote Calhoun, and they promoted this thing. Lawler did call-ins for weeks, and they went back and forth because all the wacky DJs were the guys that were the ring announcers, Johnny Randolph and Bob Moody and those guys. So they had a regular card, and I think Lawler was even wrestling maybe Rocky Johnson later. But the big match was see Lawler and Coyote, who was all of 130 pounds. And that's when Coyote unveiled his famous legendary Bohemian alligator hold, which I've stolen later on promotions with radio guys. But anyway, the night of the match comes, the advance is huge, the people start flooding in, it's shitty weather, it's raining and then turns to snow flurries. But in Louisville, it's not horrible, but it has become ice earlier that day, that afternoon, between Louisville and Nashville. And the only 4 wrestlers on the card that could get there were Ricky and Robert Gibson and Danny Little Bear and Chief Thundercloud. They battled through the elements and had left early or whatever. Everybody else, and Coyote was there, obviously, because he lived in town. Lawler got fucking stuck. Everybody else was stuck, couldn't get to Louisville. The Gardens was sold out. It's the biggest house I've ever seen, actually, to this day. The most people I've ever seen in the Louisville Gardens for wrestling. And as a result of that, they waited until the bell time was at 8 o'clock, waited till 9:45 and just gave it up. You know, nobody's going to be able to get there. And there was no cell phones in those days. So guys were stopping maybe to try to call the ticket office from a payphone on the side of the road, which took even more time, right? So anyway, with a tear in her eye, Teeny called it off and said, everybody keep your tickets and come back next week. And sure enough, they had the exact same card the next week. I think they changed one of the preliminary matches, and it was a bigger crowd. It was the only other bigger crowd because they sold it out and fucking jammed them for the same match the next week. But that first night when there was nothing else for the people to do, and this was before I had 4 or 5 pictures on the table at that time, and they still had a lot of the old black and white 8x10s they'd been getting printed. But they sold everything. They sold every single thing because people had nothing else to do but walk around and drink Cokes, eat popcorn, and, you know, buy 50-cent black and white 8x10s of wrestlers. So they sold everything they brought on the entire table, even people that weren't even still in the territory. They just first time and only time in history, they actually closed the table up before the matches were over with.
During your time as a photographer, what was the most amount of money that the Gimmick table ever made in a night?
Oh God, at Rep Arena in Lexington, because see, since Louisville was weekly, you couldn't surprise those people with a giant selection of new stuff, you know, because it happened gradually. So it was more gradual. Louisville would do, you know, on average $700 or $800. And remember, the programs were 50 cents. The 4x6 color pictures were $1. And if you wanted to really break the bank, we had color 8x10s for $3, right? That was for the hardcores. And these are not even shitty printed. These are actual photo paper, real pictures, whole 9 yards. Louisville would do $700, $800, maybe $1,000 on a Tuesday night if it was a real big house, you know, 12, 14, whatever. But Lexington would do easily $2,000, and the big shows in Lexington would break that $2,500, something like that, because we were only there once a month, and all the stuff was new to those people at the same time. So it was all hands on deck. You'd have whoever drove Teenie, whether it be Donna, her niece, or Sammy Malone, and you'd have my mom. I would run up at intermission from taking pictures and help sell stuff, and maybe we'd find somebody else too, because they'd be piled up 6 or 8 deep. And then, you'd run back up there at the end of the night because they'd all stop by before they went out the door. So it was chaos. But once again, multiply, let's just say the average in Louisville was 800. That's low. Multiply that times 50. That's $40,000 a year at the Gimmick table. Lexington, $2,000 times 12, that's $25,000. Evansville mostly sucked usually. If you did $300, you were a happy camper, but that's $15,000 a year.
And what about Memphis?
I have no idea, even because that Guy Coffey's wife, Bonnie, Miss Coffey, was in charge of that. And the reason why was because in Teenie's towns, she ordered the pictures herself. She kept track. She paid. That's the way she paid her driver and her ticket taker, and or my mom to help sell stuff and got the program sold for the office. And then she gave the guys a cut, supposedly. Now some of Dundee may take issue with that. But nobody was doing that on an organized basis on the Memphis end. And so as a result, Bonnie Coffey, the boys would get their own pictures and they'd give them to Ms. Coffey, and she and her army of young ladies who liked to hang around at her table and flirt with the boys would then sell them, and they didn't take any commission, and they gave the guys all the money. But easily, I mean, because Memphis, there was a bigger crowd than any of those shows I just talked about on a regular basis. So easily more. And it just depended on, but now once again, I've also heard Bonnie would, if one of the boys pissed her off, she'd put his pictures down at the end of the table and she'd be pushing like Lawler and Dundee. But then I think it was Lawler that did an angle one time where he had turned heel, but she still loved him. But then he did some kind of deal where he shoved Mr. Coffey around or tried to take his toupee off or whatever. And she walked up to Lawler afterwards and said, "Jerry, what do you want to do that to Guy for?" But it was thousands of dollars, every week. And that was on top of the gates. I'm talking about, that was just cash from the Gimmick table. So, there was a lot of cash going around wrestling in those days.
How much was WMC paying for the show?
I don't know for sure in the 70s, but it was $1,500 a week when I was aware of it. And I think it probably was $1,500 a week from the start, because I don't know what the deal was with HBQ. I don't think it was that much.
So that's $78,000 a year.
Well, but now that was they switched to WMC in 77, and I got into business in 82. So what's $1,500 in today's money, as they say? More like, what, 3 or 35? So it was because they were so sold out so far in advance of their advertising and at the highest prices that they would charge, because their nightly 6 o'clock news didn't get the fucking audience that wrestling got. So it was a great deal. You mean Mr. Jarrett, that to bring the highest rated locally produced television program in the country to our TV station, all we have to do is let you do it in our studio, shoot it for you, air it on our station, and make copies of tapes that you can take and put it on the air other places, and only pay you $1,500 a week? Well, goddamn, where do we sign? It was that type of deal.
What would have happened if they said no?
Oh, if they said no, then every other station in town would have grabbed it, because the only reason that WHBQ, when Jarrett split off from Goulas and went to Channel 5 to propose the program, the only reason that WHBQ dropped a wrestling program, they could have had Nick Goulas's studio show from Nashville because he was still producing one. But how would that have looked when all of a sudden Channel 5, their competitor, got Jerry Lawler, the top name wrestler in town, was about to get, and we didn't know it yet, but they had to give the 6 weeks notice or whatever, Lance Russell, the top wrestling announcer in town, and Dave Brown, the top TV weatherman in town, and the highest rated program in town. So now just have wrestling. We're going to bring in this fucking show from Nashville that's taped up there that is going to die in the ratings like Nick's shows are going to die at the Coliseum. So they just canceled wrestling because the stars and they lost it, right? They were going to be on another station. But if at any time WMC had said for whatever reason, okay, we're not going to run Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler's fucking wrestling show anymore, every other station in the market would have been doing double knockouts to fucking get it. They were never in danger of losing television in Memphis.
If things had gone down in 83 and Lawler and Lance Russell really had split off and done their own thing, do you think they would have walked away with WMC, or would they had to have gone to Channel 13 or somewhere else?
Well, therein lies maybe why that it all never happened, because of course I wasn't in the meeting, and I'm not in either guy's income tax returns. But I would think that since the bone of contention was Lawler wanted more ownership of the company, he already had a percentage of Memphis, but I don't know that included having his name on the television contract. So it would have been a deal where chances are WMC probably would have canceled Jerry Jarrett's contract and gone with a program with Lance Russell and Jerry Lawler had they had their druthers, but it may have been a contract that Jarrett could have enforced or sued over. So that means that then Lawler and Lance would have had to gone to another station, which would have taken them immediately. But then where does Jarrett get his TV show from? Does he do it still there at WMC, or are they going to honor the deal, or is he going to have to do it somewhere else and they'll just air it? Or conversely, when you go to another station, WMC was the station in town, I think, at that time. So they'd be taking a step backward, Lawler and Lance, to go to another station where then the business acumen, not of Lance Russell, but of possibly, maybe not acumen, but maybe, what's the word I'm searching for? Devotion of Jerry Lawler comes. Could he have been responsible for running a successful wrestling promotion, or losing Jerry Jarrett? Was he just going to be the star that sold the tickets but couldn't keep the fucking ship in the water? Yes. Yeah, well, then you didn't need to just jump right. but yeah, it would have fucked probably Memphis wrestling up had they not all worked together, because it was so perfect as it was. But yeah, you could have got wrestling on in Memphis affiliated with Jerry Lawler and or Lance Russell on any station in town for 20 fucking years.